Hi.
Carolyn Young, please put yourself on mute as we begin. So my name is Carolyn Young. I'm the Executive Director of the Organic Council of Ontario, and I'm here on behalf of OCO and as well the Canadian organic growers. We're helping put together this series of webinars called Your Standards, Your Say. And the purpose of these webinars is really to get a conversation going around the standards, issues with the standards, issues with scope of the standards, and you know what the review process is all about to get more people engaged with the organic standards. So I'm just going to move us along here. So we're using a platform called Zoom, and everybody on the call should be themselves. So please, if you've just joined, if you're on a phone call, you can mute yourself using *6, or you can mute yourself using the platform itself. And I will mute you if you're not muted already. So,
On peut essayer le tien. Regarde, essaye, rien, et le deuxième en haut.
Okay, so I'm muting everybody, and you'll have to figure out how to mute yourself on later when we do questions. I can unmute you then. So if you want to use the chat function, there's a little, so we can receive questions throughout the webinar. Laura Northey is also here to check in on those questions by using the little chat function. There's a little bubble chat. You can use that to check in. And we are recording this call, so everybody will get a chance to review it later on. If you're having any trouble with the platform, please do call Zoom. We can't handle everybody's calls while also hosting the webinar. Okay, without further ado, I'm also going to go into the agenda for today. Laura, do you mind just going into the manage participants piece and making sure that people are admitted as they come in?
Sure.
Great. So we're going to start with a welcome and introductions, and then Simon Jacques, who is OCO's and Ontario's rep on the Organic Federation of Canada and the technical committee for the standards, is just going to do a quick overview of the standards review process and why we're talking about the aquaponics today. Then we have Justin Henry, who is an aquaponics specialist and also the chair of the technical committee for the aquaculture standards. We have Alison Grant, who has been in organics for many years. She runs a CSA, has run a CSA, is on the OVCRT, the Organic Value Chain Roundtable, and is the chair of the Public Trust Working Group there. Marco Di Leonardo is the Research and Development coordinator with Freeman Herbs, and he's going to speak from the perspective of a greenhouse grower. We also have Brandon Habor, and I'm not sure if Frederick Meyer has joined us today yet, but they are going to speak from the perspective of an aquaponic producer. And Dave Lockman is here from ProCert. He'll be able to answer a few questions and also speak from the certification body standpoint. And also we have Jay Holmes on behalf of the CFIA here. So bear with us as we're still receiving people who are joining, so we're just do the logistics here. Okay. Please make sure you're on mute just one more time. I want to make sure that everybody can hear and there's no background noise. Okay, so Simon, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, so I'm Simon from the Organic Council of Ontario and the Organic Federation of Canada. And as Carolyn said, the reason we're having these webinars now is because we are in the process of rewriting the Canadian Organic Standard. The Organic Standard belongs to us, the industry. It doesn't belong to the government, to the CFIA, It's a standard that was written by the organic sector and is continually maintained by the organic sector. And we are in the process of updating it right now. Technically, the copyright on the organic standard is owned by the Canadian General Standards Board, but the CGSB doesn't decide on the content of the standard. But they do require the updates and the rewriting to happen according to certain set procedures, and those procedures are underway now. So far, we have received petitions for changes to the standard, and those petitions are being debated in working groups, and those working groups will present recommendations on each of those positions to the technical committee, which will vote whether or not to accept those petitions for changes. So that process is underway right now. Technically, the deadline for submitting proposals for change has passed, but if you have a concern, there's a good chance that someone has already proposed a change that addresses your concern. And if not, if you let me know, we could try and get something pushed into the working groups even at this late date. However, even if we're not making new proposals, there's still opportunity for everyone to participate in the process. Once the technical committee votes on the changes, a draft standard will be presented to the public, and the public will have the opportunity to comment on all of those proposed changes, and then the technical committee will vote again as to whether or not to modify a second time. Yeah, so that's the process we're underway right now. Specific to aquaponics, the aquaponics is now specifically something that can be certified under the aquaculture standard, which is in CGSB lingo 32312. That standard is not currently being reviewed. What is being reviewed now is just the agriculture standard. And I think the reason that we're having this conversation today is that it appears that there may be some products that could be certified as organic under the aquaculture standard, which would not be eligible for certification under the agriculture standard. So yeah, that's what we are going to be discussing today. I'm glad that the CFIA is here, that they can help answer certain questions about that. In particular, I think what maybe the CFIA could help us with is establishing some sort of method for people to be able to know if the product that they're buying has been certified organic to the agriculture standard or to the aquaculture standard. It's not clear if consumers will be able to tell by looking at a product label which standard was used to certify it as organic. And other issues might be, for instance, interpreting what aquaponic means under the aquaculture standard. Currently for agriculture, there's a CFIA-funded standards interpretation committee. The people on that committee were selected because of their experience and expertise in agriculture, and they're not necessarily experts in the aquaculture standard. And so the CFIA, perhaps they've already done that, but we'll need to establish a way of interpreting the aquaculture standard, and that might have an effect on what can end up being certified under that standard. So I think that's my brief intro. If there's any questions, or we can move on to the next.
Actually, I think we're going to take questions at the end. If there are any clarification questions, people can send them via chat.
Sounds good.
I did want to point out before we move on that any concerns or questions can be directed to either Simon, who's receiving some, you can send it to OCO at info@organiccouncil.ca, or Simon receives requests from standards@organiccouncil.ca. Also, Nicole Boudreau, who's not here today, also she's the administrator for most of the working groups. And for those of you who aren't aware, the standards review for the agriculture standards, which is going on right now for 2020, a lot of people aren't aware that you can look, and I'm just going to open this up right now. You can see what's happening. There's a PDF on the Organic Federation of Canada website where you can see the list of petitions for each of the standards, which is the organic standards, but also the permitted substances list. You can also look and see who the working groups are at the moment. So for example, we can click here, working group participants, and there's a whole list of who's in which working group. So if you're curious about a particular issue and you want to reach out to the working group to give your input, you can find out who is involved in each of those working groups here. So that will also be posted on our website for reference. So thanks so much, Simon. If there are any questions for Simon, you can chat them right now. We'll make sure that they are responded to. But without much further ado, I'd like to pass the microphone on to Justin Henry. He's going to review the process that the aquaculture standards went through and why aquaponics were involved in that standard, how that process came about. So Justin, you should be able to unmute yourself and
thanks, Carolyn.
share your screen with us.
Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I will share my screen.
Great, we can see it.
Okay. Great. So this, I will speak about the Canadian Organic Aquaculture Standard, as Simon mentioned, 32312 is the number. And sorry. Starting off with the purpose of the standard, initially, of course, to encourage more organic farming, to meet the growing demand for organic food, and to catch up to other organic standards that exist. So there are a lot of standards that included aquaculture, and Canada federally did not have a standard for that. So these are some of them that had included fish production already. The scope of the national standard includes the cultivation of crops or livestock in an aquatic environment. It includes processed products for human and animal consumption, as well as aquaculture animal feed. And I'll run through how the standard was developed. It started back in 1996, where there were a few aquaculture companies that got together for some discussions about producing their fish organically. And those continued with some of those companies implementing what they thought would fit in with the organic principles. Finally, in 2002, the Pacific Organic Seafood Association developed a standard to be used mainly in British Columbia, but other people in other areas could use that standard as well, of course. So this was the first time that aquaponics was included. It was right from the very first standard. It included both crop and livestock production. Then there were some discussions at the time with COABC in British Columbia regarding certification through this standard. Now I guess if I back up a bit, back in 2002, of course, there was no national standard that included aquaculture. And when the national standard for agriculture was put in place, under the CAP Act, the Canadian Agriculture Products Act. At that time, then COABC got out of the standards management for organics. And POSA originally approached the federal government in order to be included in the national standard. And at the time that did not work out because fish was not included under the CAP Act. So the next move was to develop this standard. Discussions between 2004 and 2008 did not lead to certification with COABC. And at that time in 2008, a working group was developed under, steered by Fisheries and Oceans Canada to develop a framework for a national standard. Now, in addition to the Pacific standard, Quebec also had their own standard for organic aquaculture. So the working group took these two standards and merged them together as a starting point to develop a national standard. In 2010, the Canadian General Standards Board Committee was put together to develop the national standard, and over that 2-year period, that initial framework, the merge of the Quebec and the Pacific standard, was used to come up with the first version of 32.312. And then in April 2012, the standard was released. The first version of the standard was released. Now this went through, of course, it's a Canadian General Standards Board standard, went through the same process as the development of 32.310, the same process of public consultation as 310 did. Then in 2014, on a separate track, the federal government was working to introduce some new legislation to be able to reference the aquaculture standard. So in 2012, when the standard was released, it was a voluntary standard, and it did not fall under regulation. Then in 2015, prior to regulation, there was an initiative to merge the two standards, and 310 and 312, to be able to merge those. So a committee was formed, and that group worked together to see how those two standards could fit together. And after several months of that, it was decided that it wasn't quite time for the merge. So they were kept separate. Then in 2017 was the 5-year review. And that's the review that Simon had just spoken about for 32.310. That same process has just occurred for 32.312 over 2017 and into 2018. So that went through, again, the same CGSB process, the same public consultation period. And then in 2018, a new version of the standard was released. Finally, in January of 2019, under the Safe Food for Canadians regulation, the standard 32.312 will fall under that and become regulated. And that's my summary.
Thanks, Justin. So,
Just a couple quick comments. Just that when it was developed for equivalency with 310, with the EU standard for aquaculture and the draft US standard for aquaculture. And then I just put in a couple of images of some of the products that currently in British Columbia fall under that standard.
Okay, thanks, Justin. I'm going to hold on to clarifying questions for after Allison speaks, as she might have her own perspective on that whole process. So, Allison,
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to speak to your perspective on the development of the aquaculture standards and in potential merging, all of that history, your perspective on where this fits into organic.
Thanks, Carolyn. Can you hear me? Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Carolyn, for putting this forum together. I think it's important that we do have an open discussion about this. I can't really comment on the process that went on with the CGSB, but what I do know is that organic agriculture, the standards we're working with now, are a result of a very long and hard slog for the organic movement that certainly started 50 years ago, if not longer. In 2009, we finally got to a federal law, the Organic Products Regulation. The standards had been voluntary up until that point, and certainly a lot of work was to put into them again to prepare them for the federal regulation under the OPR. My biggest issue really is that at this point we should be celebrating that aquaculture is joining on with organic, but the principles of the movement that started long before we were here were based on working with nature and maintaining ecology, health, fairness, and principle of care. And those defined the practices that would be acceptable in organic agriculture. Those same practices led to Canada standing up strong and saying that we would not allow hydroponic for the simple reason that it's not a natural process. So I'm sure we'll get into the debate a little later on here, but from a bigger picture, we've also struggled in the organic sector to have our message be clear. And there's always been a great deal of consumer confusion about what that means. And that really was partially our fault for maybe not being clear about the message, but there's been all kinds of outward pressure with ambiguous terms, with greenwashing. We have people that choose to call themselves spray-free, we'll use as an example, or free run, and it's all these ambiguous terms that really are riding on the coattails of organic, organic, the integrity of that word that's taken over 50 years to build. We're also in a crucial time where public trust is at the top of mind, and even in Canada, the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has identified that public trust for organic agriculture is at its lowest. So as we become keenly aware of what kind of messaging and pressures can change what happens to our own marketplace, we're about to possibly confuse the organic consumer even more from within the sector and erode the equity of that word organic. So I don't have much more to say than that. Then I think it's really unfortunate that aquaculture folks who truly, like I said, we should be celebrating that we're so close to having their standard, that they might be shooting themselves in the foot too if we cause any more confusion about the word organic. As far as being equivalent with some of our trading partners, this standard does belong to us. I think Jacques pointed that out very clearly. It's unique in the world of global standards, that it is owned by the public and the farmers that are involved. And that same principle, we stood up to deny hydroponics, because growing food in water or growing terrestrial plants in water is pretty far from the premise of soil building, which is fundamental. So that's really all I can share at this point.
Before we move on, Alison, I just want to make sure that everybody is really clear on what is allowed and what's not allowed in each of the standards. So just for everyone to understand, there is a definition of aquaponics in the aquaculture standard that allows for the production of fruits and vegetables in an aquaponic system. Is that correct? Justin, maybe you can speak to that, please?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
And then organic agriculture standards, we have a minimum requirement of soil.
That's right, and that same soil building practice, which was the is fundamental to organic practices based on those principles. That even went so far as to define what amount of soil or the size of a pot may be used in greenhouse growing. So it's not just about not growing in water, it's really about having soil filled with happy microbes to promote health. You know, the old way of describing it was healthy soil made healthy plants, made healthy people. So I don't deny that growing using aquaponics is ingenious and resourceful and a very effective way to have a full circle in an aquaculture setting. However, I also believe that because it's so innovative that they're quite capable of having successful marketing without co-opting organic and possibly doing damage to the sector as a whole.
Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to hear some other opinions on this. Thanks, Alison.
Oh, can I throw in one more point?
Sure.
That it wasn't that long ago, I think, and one of the other folks might be able to tell me, but the original draft for the aquaculture standard did not talk about crop and livestock. It was pretty clear that at that point it was fish and aquaponics, and the natural assumption would be that it was aquaculture. And it wasn't until a second draft that language was changed to say crop and livestock. So I don't, maybe the intent always was, but it didn't start off that way, and there was an obvious change.
Okay, so we'll let Justin respond to that in maybe.
Or just to, yeah, thanks, Carolyn. Just to clarify on that, lots of terminology did change for the 2018 draft. Although there was no addition of aquaponics, all of the standards back to 2002, everyone has included plant production and animal production. The terminology changed to crop and livestock to better align with 310, but aquaponics was not an addition.
Okay, I think we'll have more questions on this a bit later, but before, I want to make sure that we get a chance to hear from Marco. Marco, are you still on the call? Or did we lose you?
I am, I'm here. So, I don't know, I'll go full screen. Well, I don't know where to go to full screen, but can you all see me?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, so yes, I have quite mixed feelings about aquaponic to be able to be called organic. In principle, I understand that if you have an aquaculture system where your fish is organic, I think that should be allowed, because if you're raising your fish in an organic way, they are in their own environment, they are in water, and it's okay for them to be organic. Now, because the fish is organic, it doesn't mean that growing plants on water, it can be called organic. As Alison was mentioning, the there is a whole principle of having soil involved in the growing media, where there is a bacteriological activity that will make nutrients available to the plants. Now, bioponic or aquaponic farms, they argue saying that, oh, but there are bacteria in the water system that will allow the the nutrients to be available to the plant exactly in the same way that happens in the media. And actually, some of this micro activity is the same that happens in the soil. And I can agree with that. But there is a main factor that needs to be considered. I cannot grow catgrass or microgreens on a felt that is declared organic, a hand felt that is organic, and it's an inert material, because I need to have soil in it. I mean, I would not be, my microgreens and my catgrass will not be certified unless I add media or soil to the pot where I have the felt on which I grow the microgreens. So if I am not allowed, why should an aquaponic farm where the environment is just water be able to grow it? So I'd say they should add soil to their water. It's like I should add soil to my felt. So this is one of the first things. Second, by the organic standard says that I don't remember the percentage, but most of the nutrients must come from the media. You can use only, I think, 30% of liquid fertilizer as a source of nitrogen to your plant. Well, aquaponics use 100% of their fertilizer liquid. So how can you accept that and allow and expect me not to have the same facility or the same possibility? So it is, I think it's either we change the standard for everybody, then we can start to consider where aquaponic is accepted or not, where there is this availability of nutrients to the plant through microbiological activity, where the soil, it's not that important, where sustainability comes in, where there is other factors that are required by organic cultivation to come in. Then, as I said, in principle, I agree that aquaponics should be called organic, but there is not, the standard does not allow that. So unless you change the standard for everybody, you can't call aquaponic organic. And that's a fact. I'm having a lot of frustration lately, and having the fact that we grow herbs, and herbs in Canada, it's not really being considered as a sector in itself. We get into the vegetables or leafy vegetables, but sorry, but then there is not inputs for herbs, and you have to have herbs in there. You're not the vegetables, you're a herb, but then there is not a sector for herb. So now I have all the stuff that comes from the States. They use product that doesn't say herb in Canada, but they say herbs in the States for different labels. So I think that there is a lot to do in these in the standards and in the consideration of the laws in Canada. I think that Canada has become very strict on organic cultivation, more strict than Europe for some reason. And then you want to become so labeled on the fact that you can grow aquaponic and call it organic. The fact that I think it really should be looked at, it's first of all regulating the word organic, because I see product now available on the market that says organic aquaponic or organic vegetable salads or produce that is grown aquaponically. That's for me, it's wrong, just because it's associated with organic aquaculture. aquaculture is organic, aquaponics is not. You should not put that on a label or on a package.
I just want to clarify one thing. First of all, you said something about herbs being different in the States versus Canada. Can you just clarify that a little bit? What do you mean? What is the competition that you're seeing?
Well, you see, when I have to use the organic pest control or fungicides, I need to have herbs and on the label to be able, or the herbs on the label to be able to use it on the herb. But then, if you go and check on the organic label herbs, it's not a category apart. It falls in the same category as vegetables. But then you need to be a different category for a label to be able to use the product. And there is, because there is not many a possibility of using this product. I mean, I don't know. It's not easy to control the disease and to grow organically, to grow a herb organically is not easy because there is not a lot of exposure of it. So this is something that I think it could be increased or looked at by the organic movement as well. So the reason is that, you know, like we compete with product from the States and we don't have the same laws. So we can't say that, oh, in the States aquaponic is organic, therefore we have to do it here. We are different, and I believe that maybe something can be done on a standard as a North American continent and see a little bit. Then I do agree that we should go like aquaponic and be organic and so on.
Okay.
Marco, it's Allison. Do you mean medicinal herbs that we can't call organic in Canada? Herbs for tinctures?
No, I'm talking about edible. I mean, we grow edible herbs like basil, parsley, you know, all these culinary herbs.
Right. Okay.
And yeah, and it is okay to, I mean, you can grow organic. What I'm saying is that we don't really have a lot of tools to grow herbs organically. If we have a disease, we practically have to throw away everything because there is no herbs on the label, and there is not interest of putting herbs on the label because it's a niche market. So, so as it's difficult for a herb grower to grow organically, I don't see why it should be so easy for an aquaponic grower to call his product organic.
Right. Okay, so Marco, I think we're going to move on right now.
Yeah.
To clarify, can you hear me? Can everyone?
Yes, I can.
I do want to clarify that, and I believe that Justin will speak to this, but the standards, the aquaculture standards are actually still not, so the aquaponics are still not allowed to be called organic at the moment. Is that right, Justin? I believe it's coming into place in 2019.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn and Marco. Just to clarify that, the standard came out in 2012, the voluntary standard, and at that time, then aquaculture and aquaponics was allowed to be called organic if you followed the standard and were audited and certified under the standard. The difference in come January will be that the standard changes from a voluntary standard to a regulated standard, but there's no difference in aquaponics at that time.
But it would be so that people who actually call them their product organic under the aquaculture standards would have to be certified to that standard, and there would be oversight of that.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, but at the moment, there are products on the market that they've been certified organic, aquaponic agricultural produce certified organic. I think that's wrong because
and that is possible now under the 32312 voluntary standard.
Right. And currently in Ontario, as you know, we don't have regulation of the word.
Yeah, I do.
That also adds to some of the confusion.
So that's why I say that should be the first thing that we should do. We should regulate the word because, as I said, in principle, I am pro, but it's wrong because the law says differently.
Well, it sounds like what you're arguing for is that it needs to be a fair playing field.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm going to pass the mic on now to Brendan Hebor. I don't know if I say that right. Brendan, would you like to speak from an aquaponics perspective?
Yeah, sure. So again, I'm an aquaponics farming entrepreneur. About 2.5 years of experience, sort of small scale commercial operations. But when my business partner and I sat down to look at a business plan, and what we do now is try to inspire other entrepreneurs and people to look at sustainable forms of agriculture. It really helps the business model when you can identify, a better margin on your product, considering that the investment into controlled environment agriculture and integrated aquaponics and soilless systems is a higher upfront cost. It does translate to some better revenues in the long run. But in our experience, we're seeing a lot of misunderstanding in terms of the clarity, as has already been said today, between aquaculture standards and hydroponic standards. And then it really comes down, and I think some of the things that Marco had mentioned in using absolutely no soil in aquaponics versus using media or dual root zone that come into different components of the actual engineering and technology design, where an aquaculture system can have a zone of bioreaction that can work in a flow process to create an ecosystem for microbes that can convert nutrients. But in addition to that, in the actual plant ecosystem, we can have different types of designs that maybe some are more conducive to a traditional organic standard that has more media or a pot that is able to absorb the aquaponic water, but still has the plant sitting in a root zone or some sort of substrate that continues to build on a smaller content of soil. So it's been very interesting, for me in terms of a journey as an entrepreneur and a farmer, and understanding ways that currently we can look at organic certification for. We are OceanWise recommended. It's not a certification, but they're looking at the conditions, again, more on the aquaculture side, as well as our ASC Aquaculture Stewardship Council looking at the practices there. But I think as soon as you look at a system that works in symbiosis, being a coupled system versus a decoupled system that has two components running separately with segments of integration for nutrient flow, looking at the standards and how they work from really a supply chain management and what are you feeding your fish and obviously any nutrients in your plants. So I'm not going to say I have a firm perspective besides, from an entrepreneurship standpoint. I think that there is definitely the case for aquaponics to be certified organic in some capacity, and it really comes down to the broader picture of what is almost a subcategory, and with that needs to come some consumer information or just knowledge in the marketplace to help people understand exactly what goes into cultivating it. But I think the high level of what we try to do with our business is traceability and helping people to understand, exactly who's growing their food, what's in it, how it's grown, and be able to create a bit more of a relationship between yourself, especially in the retail market, and how does that look on packaging.
So you're arguing in some ways that an aquaponics system could be called a mixed farm, in that it has coupled livestock and crops.
Well, it's an integrated system, and for the purposes of sustainability, it really, aquaponics is sort of ancient technology that's now taken the form of innovation. And we now have this tank-based aquaculture systems that are integrated into whether it's just controlled environments or there's vertical farming, and there's all these other sort of complex terms that are being thrown out there. I think they're really sort of clouding the true benefit in vertical farms being sustainable versus aquaponic farms being sustainable, and so much misinformation out there that I think really comes down to educating people. But in the actual system design in aquaponics, most commonly we see a raft culture that's a floating styrofoam raft where the plant roots are suspended directly in the water. Well, there are other designs and media bed designs or dual root zone designs that have a similar concept in that they're being fertilized by fish poop water, and then the plants are actually grown in a substrate that replicates something like the soil. And so there are different types of, whether or not it becomes a case-by-case basis or just identifying, a portion of a system design, or can your lettuce not be organic because it's just in water, but can your herbs and tomatoes grown in a media bed be certified? Again, that's sort of a technical question I throw there.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns currently is that the aquaponics section in the aquaculture standards is pretty general at the moment, and it would be good to hear from our panelists at some point if aquaponics are allowed to be called organic, what changes it make to that definition. So one question was, should we include aquatic plants and not terrestrial plants, for example. So yeah, I'm going to move us along. I think I really wanted to get to some of the questions that are coming up here.
Carolyn, it's Allison. I just want to clear something up really quickly. Brandon suggested that we are already under the organic standard 32.310 able to grow lettuce or vegetables, plants in a media that isn't soil, and I wanted to correct that indeed we are restricted to soil and we're not allowed to have soilless media.
I think there's a minimum requirement for soil, correct?
Yes, and those people that are using container growing would suggest it's not particularly minimum if they wanted to use a soilless medium in the first place.
Okay, I'm going to move this along to invite Dave Blackman to speak, and our guest from CFIA. Really, I just want to get into the particulars of what our current situation is, what is currently allowed, what is not allowed, and where are there potential areas for confusion, and what can we do about it, if anything?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So now we'll get into the nitty-gritty in terms of the regulations and so forth, how everything is going to be working. From a certification body's perspective, we were already accredited under ISO 17065 to certify to the aquaculture standard. But soon CFIA will be revising accreditations to certification bodies to include the aquaculture portion, 32.312, for those CBs that are able to certify to those standards. Okay. The products which could not be certified before under the aquaponics, and there was discussion about, well, aquaponics were already allowed and so forth. And our understanding is that under the current federal regulations includes all plants and foods and agricultural products. So these products, if they were sold across provincial borders, it would have to be compliant with the organic products regulation. If they're sold within the province, then it becomes kind of a provincial matter, and CFI sometimes don't go into those provincial jurisdiction issues. But CFI can speak more to that than me. In terms of the system, there's lots of questions still have to be asked. One is going to be the equivalency arrangements. So as of today on the CFI website, they're stating that aquaculture would not be part of any equivalency arrangement. So any products from aquaponics, any wild crop, seaweed, any agricultural product will not be part of any trade agreement. This may change in the future as they renegotiate things. From a certification perspective, just to let you know, in terms of certification, we're going to consider 312 just like any other core certified product. Okay, so the certificates will actually say that the product is either compliant to 32.310 and or 32.312. Okay, so you will, as a consumer, you will not necessarily know to which standard the product is compliant, because at the end of the day, they're all compliant to the Canada organic regime. Okay. The distinction is going to be whether or not the product will be covered under a trade agreement. And that's where only, as of today, only 310 products can be covered under a trade agreement. But this may change. So that's pretty much all I have to bring today. So as a certification body, we're pretty much ready. We're doing some final changes and so forth to adapt to the new standards, the latest version of the standard, and we're going to be ready to certify on January 15, 2019.
Okay, Dave. So one question for you is, you know, what does it mean to if you have you're certifying to the aquaculture standards, aquaponics. First of all, I think that's coming into place in 2019. Can you remind me of the date, please?
January 15th.
January 15th, and that's for all parts of that standard.
Yes.
Yeah. And so currently, I think one of the biggest questions is around labeling.
Yes.
Is there, does ProCert have a sense of, will they use the same certification label?
Yeah, there's absolutely no, essentially there's no distinction in the regulation when it comes to labeling to either standard. So a product compliant to the core essentially can have the Canada Organic Regime logo, can have this, it's exactly the same labeling requirements. So obviously if you're exporting the product, then essentially you have to ensure you comply with the country you're exporting to. Like I said, there's no trade agreement, so agriculture products in Canada, could not be labeled, with a USDA logo until an agreement is reached.
And what jurisdictions are going to be priorities for equivalency agreements? Do you know?
We have no idea.
Okay, great.
I think I would assume that there's a priority on some, like there will be categories of products which were, like for example, the aquaponics products is going to be a big item because that will include tomatoes, that will include lettuce or different products, which was already covered under the OPR. Now will be covered under a different standard. There will be all the wild seaweed production, okay, which was covered under 310, which is moving now to 312. So I would think those would be the priorities.
Okay.
I think just a comment on priorities. I think that the U.S. was the top priority, EU and Japan.
And is there a clarity on how, so is the aquaponics section of the aquaculture standards, does that fit with current organic standards in the U.S.?
It does not. The aquaponics, the plant side of aquaponics does fit with the U.S. because aquaponics is allowed in the U.S. However, the fish side does not. The U.S. does not have a standard for fish yet. It's being developed and has been in the works for many years. So that will be more difficult for the U.S. side.
Okay, I do want to make sure that I'm not sure if Frederick Miner has joined us or not. I know that he was coming late. Okay, so I'm just going to ask, Jay Holmes is here on behalf of the CFIA. Jay, do you want to just unmute yourself for a second? Just make sure that you are unmuted. Okay, Jay, can you speak?
Oh, I was just told that I was unmuted.
Okay, you are now, yes.
All right. Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Go
ahead.
No, so what we just heard, I assume that was CODA just talking about priority for equivalence arrangements?
No, that was Dave Lockman from ProCert, Organic.
Oh, okay, sorry. So yes, in terms of that understanding of what priorities are in the future. So those negotiations are taken care of by our international affairs branch in consumer protection and market fairness. The record here, we focus more on the rules themselves, but that's a correct understanding of what the priorities are for the future. For that, when we started this call, and a few minutes ago too, the whole question of labeling has come up. I guess that's one thing I can touch on, and the question of the Standards Interpretation Committee. I don't know, are there other things that folks want to discuss, or should I just do those and see where the conversation takes us?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd love to hear CFIA's perspective on labeling, and also,
Sure.
yeah, I think maybe there was a question touched on there about provincial regulations.
Right. That interpretation was correct with respect to what we do versus provinces. And, so we're sort of at that mercy of, how does the province set its regime up? Do they set it up to mirror ours? Do they build their own? Do they not have one? There's sort of that variability, I guess, in the provinces with respect to that. But if it goes between provinces, then yes, it falls under the core. As far as labeling goes, so absolutely true that the label or the logo that you see, there's no distinction between the standards when you see it on a product. And our thinking or our view, I guess, when it comes to labeling aquaponic or aquaculture certified products versus agriculture standard certified products, was that if somebody was making and selling a product that they felt offered a unique value, whether it's it was interesting to hear the words, if it's an ingenious or resourceful thing that they've done or product they've created, the CFI would support people voluntarily making that claim, provided it was truthful and not misleading. This was produced to this standard aquaponically. By the same token, if people felt that there was a unique value in marketing their product as, this is the product of the soil, or this has come from the soil with all the benefits that entails, as long as that statement was truthful and not misleading, if people wanted to say this organic product was certified under this standard or comes from this standard or this method, then that would be something that we would get behind too on a voluntary basis. So we would really let producers of food highlight to their customers, those things that they think offer that unique value to them.
Okay, so it's a voluntary labeling. I think I know that OCO had at our AGM last year a discussion about aquaponics, and there was some, I think, consensus around the idea of having labeling saying organic or organic aquaponics are in some ways different. So anyways, at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions, and there were a few questions on the chat that I would be happy to share with everyone. Jérôme Antoine, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself? Maybe just introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? I had a few questions, but I'll sum it up for two. In 3212, Article 1.3 says that in the event of any conflict or inconsistency between 3212 and 3210 or 3211, so the organic standards, 3212 will take precedence. Now, I don't know if this is a question for CFIA, a question of labeling, but I was curious to know what this means exactly. And then in the review of 3210 and 3211, will we just simply write the same thing, that it will take precedence over any other standards? My second question.
Sorry, can you just let's just repeat for everybody. 3212.
Yeah, Article 1.3.
And that's the aquaculture standards?
Yes.
Okay.
And the Article 1.3 of 3212 says 32312, sorry, says that in the event of any conflict or inconsistency between 312 and 310 or 311, excuse me, 312 will take precedence. So
Yep,
maybe Dave maybe Dave Lockman could comment that, or Justin. Sorry, go ahead.
Justin will be better for that one. I really don't know.
Yeah.
I can.
The
I can
CFI,
comment.
we would defer to Justin on this as well as the expert on that.
Sure, I'll just comment on that, and other people can add theirs as well. The reason that that clause was included is because the standard throughout 32.3.12, there are several cases where 312 refers to 310 and refers to 311. And that's how this standard was built. Now, that was written in case in the future, if under revisions, 310 and 311 make changes, which are out of control of the committee that's developed 312, they don't want those changes to substantially change 312. That's the reason for the clause, just because of the reference. So I don't think it would be the other way around, because I don't believe that 310 references 312.
So one question for, I mean, to parking lot, I guess you could say, on this discussion. We had a question around, is there a possibility of including in 10 and 11, the organic standards, some reference to the aquaculture standards that limits it in some way when it comes to aquaponics, since we are in that review process right now? And what you're saying is that because of this clause, that would not be possible, unless we included some reference to the aquaculture standards.
Yeah, correct. It's a standalone standard. 312 has the same weight as 310.
Okay, so Jérôme Antoine, does that cover your question, or do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, I had another question concerning Article 5.4.2.1 of 32.3.12. I'll just read it out for those, or you can see it in the chat there. Crop cultivation shall only utilize nutrients naturally occurring in the environment or from organic livestock production, preferably located nearby as part of an integrated multi-trophic aquaculture system. So can we assume that this article prevents the addition of more liquid fertilizer, thus preventing the introduction of a more organic hydroponic system in the standard? And then there was another question concerning fish, and it was answered by Justin that in order to comply with 312, it is required that there are fish. So I guess that as well prevents the introduction, because that's what I'm hearing from producers is that concerning aquaponics is the slippery slope towards organic hydroponics, and that's not desired. So I was just wanted to know what you guys thought of that article 5.4.2.1 being sort of something preventing that organic hydroponics from occurring.
Justin? Did we lose Justin?
Yeah, thanks for the question. For 5.4.2.1, I think that question would probably have to go to interpretation committee. My thought on it is that you can, I don't remember the specific discussion about that, but if you add anything, it has to be on the approved substances list. So
Yeah.
I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, if you follow the clause next to it, which is 5.4.2.2, then essentially it refers to enclosed and recirculation systems, which will be more typical of aquaponics. And then it states that you can use anything in table 4.2 of 311. Okay, so the way I read it, 5.4.2.1 is the general statement, because this is in the crop production area. So if you're doing a crop production out at sea or in the natural environment, then you're going to be limited to that. But if you have an enclosed recirculation system, then you can use nutrients from table 4.2.
So that table 4.2 is substances list, just to
Yeah, 4.2, that's it. That's permitted substances.
people who don't know the standards very well. So basically what is being said here is that in an aquaponics enclosed system, you would be able to use permitted substances in that system as liquid fertilizer, correct?
Yes. From the way I read it, so essentially in aquaponics, you can use anything within tree 11, which is the permitted substance list, table 4.2, in addition to what is listed in the PSL of the aquaponics standard, which would include EDTA chelated minerals, which is the additional one.
Okay, so just as a follow-up question there, if Justin doesn't mind just speaking to who is currently on the standards interpretation committee for the aquaculture standards, and one other question I would have is that is there a requirement for a certain number of fish to be in an aquaponics system?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. In terms of numbers of fish, I don't know that there's a reference to that. Sorry, I would have to take a look through the standard. I don't recall there being a number. In terms of the interpretation committee, that is currently evolving because there's been an interpretation committee with 5 members that have spread across the country in various aspects of aquaculture and organics. But that committee will be changing as it becomes formalized leading up to January 15th when it falls under regulation. So that is something that will be developed over the next couple of months or formalized over the next couple of months.
Great. So I want to just remind people that, so there is another question here. There was another question from Jérôme Antoine Brunel that I wanted to, it's again directed at Justin, but perhaps Dave could also speak to this, which is really, he wanted to know why the attempted merge did not go through, or why was it decided not to merge in the end. There was some talk of a merger between the aquaculture standards and the agriculture standards, and why did this not happen?
Okay, I can't speak for everybody, but from my recollection, there was quite a bit of work that went into it, and I think it was a benefit to both standards. A lot of changes were recommended and made, eventually made into when the aquaculture standard was reviewed, a lot of those discussions and changes were implemented. And I guess that for 310, the same thing will happen. The reason that I recall that it didn't merge is that it didn't seem like the entire group there on the agriculture side was convinced that aquaculture in general should be allowed under organic. Some people were opposed to having fish as a certified organic product, and so we thought at the end, we could, if it came down to a vote on it, I think it would have passed, but we didn't want it to be like that where there'd be continual conflict. So we thought we'd give it another 5 years, and when aquaculture was more established in the organics in Canada, then it might go more smoothly.
Hello?
Carolyn, you're muted.
We can't hear you, Carolyn.
Sorry, there is a person on the phone who put their hand up. It's a 519 number. I'm just wondering if that person has a question. I've unmuted you. You should be able to speak. Okay, we'll leave it. So I have another question. Sorry. So I have another question. There's another question here from Allison. Allison, did you want to ask that yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. I just wanted Dave to clarify about EDTA and chelated vitamins. Essentially, what I understand is permitted substances allowed under the aquaculture standard that is essentially synthetic, which means that going through an aquaponic system means that the crop will be grown in a synthetic media, or have some, which we're not allowed to do in our permitted substances.
Well, from what I understand is that anything grown under tree 10 cannot use substances that are allowed under tree 12. Tree 12 can use the substances which they reference are allowed, just like table 4.2, and they also reference, I think, 4.3, but the opposite is not permitted.
But do the 4.2 allow substances that we would consider synthetic? Thus, the crop aquaponics would be grown with synthetic?
Allison, can you just clarify too, while you're at this, what EDTA is?
That's a question for Dave.
Oh, that's what it says in the permitted substance here. EDTA, it's a chemical. It's a chelating agent, which in full name is ethylene-nitriacetate salt. Okay, so the way it's stated, so it's a chelating agent for micronutrients, and it's allowed to maintain trace elements in solution and available as micronutrients in recirculation systems. Okay, so
yeah, it's used mostly in iron and other micronutrients so that they last longer on the plant, and it's not allowed in organic cultivation.
Correct.
So I guess one of the questions here is, and this is, I think, a question for us to, again, parking lot is, do we, as from the perspective of 310 and the agriculture standards, wish to either reference those permitted substances or have to create a fair playing field to have some sort of acknowledgement of those permitted substances, or do we want to somehow have influence on the aquaculture standards in the future? So I'm not asking anybody these questions, I'm just putting that out to the group. Marco, did you want to say anything on that?
Well, I just want to reiterate what I was saying before. From hearing everybody, aquaculture could be a great addition to organic, but in that case, regulation should be, the standards, it should be equal for all kind of cultivation. You can't have the possibility of using EDTA for aquaculture and then we can't use it. It's a great tool, but it's been declared illegal everywhere in the world. So it should be illegal here for organic cultivation. So as a foreigner, as a European, I always gone through European rules, which are very strict. And I find that Canada it's a very good country because it's not as loose as the United States. In the United States, you can do whatever you want. In fact, I found out that Canadian company here are using an oil spray that it's considered organic in the States, or it can be used on herbs in the States, but it can't be used on herbs here because in the States it's so easy to register it, so they can get anything. So Canadian company producing a mineral oil in Mississauga, they register it in the States first, and it's got a whole list, so you can use it on herbs, but we can't use it here. So really, I think that really what we should focus on, and this is my point to a CFIA in particular, and to ProCert, who's actually our certifying body. We go through the rules and we follow all the rules that we need to, because that's the law. But you can't have differences and this, because that creates an unfair competition and in the produce growers. So that's my 2 cents.
Hi, Marco. I would think that EDTA would be the #1 issue with the trade agreements with the United States, unless they didn't read the standards and they don't care. Because I would think that they're just not allowed in the NOP, like you said, and I think that's going to be a major issue when it comes to the aquaponic products. In terms of ProCert's position, and it's a tough one because certifying bodies or third party, we're not voting members on any standards. We don't write the regulations. We're kind of, we're on the outside looking in, and we essentially just administer and certify to sets of laws and regulations that they write. Okay, so we're always here to comment, to help, or to provide guidance, but we don't have any say in anything.
Yeah, no, my point for ProCert was, like, for example, is the example I said before. I applied for the use of the hemp felt to grow microgreens on it, and I was said I can't unless there is soil added to it. But then aquaponics can be certified organic, which is something that is wrong, and they don't use soil at all. So it's a double standard.
Well, it's essentially, yeah. So in Canada, we have essentially same products falling under 2 different standards, which, I mean, in my personal opinion, is a heck of a conundrum.
Yeah.
And it's going to be something, I think, for the industry to adjust and bring their concerns to the rule makers. I mean, they are the ones who make the rules.
Yeah, it will be much easier. It will be much easier for the consumers as well if there is more clarity in the standards than there is now. As they were saying, okay, first, and in fact, the first thing that should be done really is regulating the word organic in Ontario. But that's another issue.
Working on that. So because we have 10 minutes left here, what I want to do is to ask each of the panelists that are here. Maybe the CFI can say something, maybe they can't, I'm not sure. But I'd love to ask each of the panelists here what they think the next potential steps to solving some of this challenge is, if there is any. You may think that there's no challenge, but what could you offer as something that you think would be a solution to this? So if there was a #1.
I think
Go ahead, Jay.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, it's Jay here to CFI. Before I get to the sort of what can we offer, I think I touched on this a bit in the sense of voluntary labeling, but really from our standpoint, and I've kind of listened to everything today, and the job I'm in now is not the job I was in 2 years ago. I was the person who was the project manager for the SSCR actually, while a lot of these decisions were being made, including this one. And I guess we as the regulator, and this was true with SSCR, when we do sit down and say what should the final content of this be, we have to balance the views of all the stakeholders here, whether in the industry folks, the consumers as well. And I think we heard a really good, it was interesting for me to hear this, because it mirrored, I think, the comments we got or the comments we got on the SSCR. And, when there is that sort of even split, or that split where on both sides they're, arguing their principles from good faith, we look at, what was the intent, what was the policy intent of what we were trying to do, what outcome we were trying to bring around. And for us, when we saw this split between the comments, it was really looking at the purpose of the SSDR was to be innovation sustaining, and to give consumers access to products that they might not have had before. And so that's why we made the decision that we did. And knowing that, there were 2 poles here, and that sort of brings me to what can we do in the future? And I'll leave the question of the standards to others, but just from our perspective, and Justin touched on this too, we're working with him and others to bring in or to put into place a standards interpretation committee that can start answering some of these questions that we heard about aquaponics or about the aquaculture standard more generally. But the other thing that we can do too, would be happy to explain or to work with people to talk about what a voluntary label or what a voluntary claim might look like in the future, if people want to create a claim that sort of highlights the fact that this product was grown or certified under 310 versus 312, and maybe I'll leave it at that. Like, we're willing to work in that voluntary space.
Okay, thank you, Jay. I think there's a bigger question about, is there an advantage to growers to label their products as aquaponics? I mean, I think one of the things that we haven't really discussed in detail here is the difference in cost for each of the production. But I'm not actually clear if aquaponics production would be more cost effective or not. But that was, I think, something that's been raised is, if it's more cost effective to grow aquaponically, but the standards are changed, then we've essentially changed the organic standards for growing grains in that system.
Can I just interrupt for a second? It's more than cost effective. It's maybe you can say cost effective. The production, the yield that you can achieve from aquaponic, it can be much higher than the yield that you achieve when growing in media, in soil. So because you push nutrients and the plants, they grow faster and bigger, and therefore you can have an advantage. Yes.
Okay, so yeah, and so I'm going to go around and do a round robin of what you think each panelist thinks the priority is in terms of addressing this tension or this challenge. I did also have another question that I wanted to ask at some point, and I don't think I'll have a chance to ask it, but I'm going to put it out there to the people who are on the panel, which is, does this then include marijuana or cannabis growing in aquaponics? So I'm just going to put that out there as a question, and to highlight the fact that OCO is going to be having some other standards webinars. So our next one is on parallel production, or actually our next one is on cannabis production, and that's on November 28th. We have postponed the livestock poultry access to the outdoors until January. So our next webinar will be on the 28th, and that's on organic cannabis. And on the 29th, we're having a webinar on parallel production. And actually the chair of the technical committee for organic agriculture will be there, Hugh Martin. So that's another issue that there's an ongoing tension around. So without further ado, I'd love to pass it on. We'll go in the same order as our panel. So Justin, would you like to give some thoughts, final thoughts?
Sure, thanks, Carolyn. My final thoughts are that right now we have products in Canada, if we take lettuce as an example, but it could be anything, that are on the shelf with the Canadian organic logo on it. And the consumer doesn't know under which standard that lettuce was produced. It could have been produced in the US under the US standard. It could have been produced in the EU, in Japan, anywhere where we have equivalency. It sits on the shelf with the Canadian logo on it, and the consumer does not know where it's from. So what I think that we have to do is that this is one more standard, and there'll be another head of lettuce on the shelf under a different standard, but the consumer, again, won't know which standard. And what we have to do is we all have to work together to promote organic and to encourage the consumer to buy organic and the reasons why they should buy organic. I think that if we start with conflicting messages or saying that one organic is better than the other, the consumer then will be confused and will just choose conventional.
Allison?
Just a correction, Justin. When using the organic logo, if it is an imported product, it is required that it says imported directly under the Canadian organic logo. And that was a fight that we won a very long time ago to differentiate between domestic and imported product. I think that we pointed out even more so today that there is a fundamental difference between what you may call or what others may call organic aquaponics and what the intent of organic agriculture and the fundamental principles it was based on. This is not much different than using Chilean nitrates in the States, which we're not allowed to use in Canada because it directly feeds the plant. I feel like we have once again diminished the terminology of organic to merely a marketing ploy, and I think Brandon kind of pointed that out. Aquaculture or aquaponics could be under another certification system. It does not have to be under organic. And I'm really sad that we believe that consumers are driven by that logo only and don't understand that there is a difference. And if I'm an organic consumer and I don't want synthetics, or I want to know that my food is grown in a natural process, which means in soil, that is not going to catch up with us.
I think it will catch up with us eventually.
Oh, yes, it will. We have smart, knowledgeable consumers now. We don't have oblivion.
Alison, one thought from you on what to do about it?
Oh boy, I don't know. I'm actually disappointed that OCIA, or not OCIA, who's OCIA? CFIA is allowing the logo to be used in such a manner without respecting the where it came from. So I think they're partially responsible.
All right, so I think it sounds like maybe we need to be working with CFIA on the labeling decision from your perspective. So I'm going to move to Brand. It's actually Marco first. What do you think we should be doing?
Yes, well, I agree with what Justin said and Alison. I think that there is already so much confusion. I mean, there is so much uneducation on the path of what is organic and why organic is so important for you, that adding a new label or differences that are not respecting the organic cultivation is like shooting ourselves in the foot. So we should not allow, in my opinion, aquaponic to be called organic, because it would create just confusion. Create a different label that says a completely different things like this aquaponic, hydroponic. No, you're not organic, point. Let's keep organic what it is, the principle of organic. And otherwise the consumer will be so confused that honestly they will go back to conventional. Still already now, when I speak to people, they say, why would I spend more money for organic? And there I go and explain why. But if you then add it and it says, oh, well, then there is aquaponic, and then you can use substances that are not allowed, and are synthetic, and synthetic fertilizer, and it's too much. It's too much. Let's keep things simple, and let's stick to the principle of what organic is.
So Marco, maybe you can join the Standards Interpretation Committee for the Aquaculture Standard.
Yeah, I wish.
Okay, Brandon. Are you there, Brandon? Oh, we did lose him. Okay, I'm gonna move on to Dave then.
Okay. Well, the biggest challenges that we see, a certification body is going to be number one, interpretation. Okay, as in your regulation, new standards. We already have the first question we're going to have is going to be how many fish do you need in order to be classified as aquaponics? Okay, if you read today, then it's essentially it's one. Okay, so will these things change? So, and there's we've identified a lot of matters of interpretation which they're going to need to be resolved by an interpretation body. The second issue is going to be trade. Okay, so it will increase another level of complexity. How will these trade arrangements be able to be ratified, or how will the products fit within the already organic products already within the system? And just a quick question to Jay, which is a matter of interpretation that has actually a lot of importance, is in 2019, will aquaculture products now be classified as agricultural?
They would fit under the Canadian organic regime, which is intended to apply to food.
But is it agricultural, or the term agricultural will not apply anymore? It will just be food.
Can you repeat that? So are you asking, so come January 15th, 2019?
Yeah, so for
aquaculture,
today, the distinction between agricultural and non-agricultural essentially is the definition that definition has been used to essentially determine if something can be certified under the organic product regulation.
Right.
Will agricultural exist in 2019, or are we moving to something different?
Agricultural products will still exist. So once the SFCR comes into force, the things that are covered by those standards and covered by the Canadian organic regime will be part of that regime. Is that answering your question, or? Well,
not really, because I mean, I'm a regulatory junkie. Okay, I look at words. Every word's have importance. So, for example, in Tree 10, if you're making a processed product or packaging a product or so forth, Tree 10 refers to only agricultural organic products, which can be used. Today, for example, that does not include agriculture products. So will in 2019, agricultural include agriculture? If not, then we have a big issue in terms of using agriculture products as ingredients in organic products.
So actually, maybe this would be a good discussion to have offline, because I think there are a few things that we need to pick apart in this actually to understand it. But the way the core was set up, we know that there can be things certified to 310 and 312 that aren't food, or those standards can be used to certify other products. As far as the core is concerned, or as far as the CFI is concerned, the use of that logo can apply only to food until 2019.
So you don't know.
So can you give me an example actually of a product that you're speaking about? Or
I'm going to jump in here, Jay. When the Safe Foods for Canadian regulation comes out, how is it described in that as food? Is it just a blanket statement that the Safe Food for Canadian is food?
So how is food defined in the SFCR?
Yeah. Do you break it down to agricultural, food, feed, seed, aquaculture, whatever?
No. The way that the SFCR defines food is it uses the definition, as I recall, from the Food and Drugs Act.
Currently, if you look at Tree 10, under Section 9.1, product composition, in order to certify an organic packaged product, it has to be comprised of organic, whole, or processed agricultural ingredients. Okay, so agricultural is what defines everything that can be used. So it's defined as agricultural or non-agricultural. So I guess it's a question that needs to be answered in terms of in the SFCR, does the term agricultural actually applies anymore? If not, then Tree 10 needs to be revised to make sure that we know what is going to be comprising an organic product.
Or is aquaponics and aquaculture now considered agricultural?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah.
So is aquaponics, that's a good question. And I think it's one we're going to need to take away and think about. And actually, if you wanted to send it to me in writing, we could have a look at that.
Sure.
Sounds like it's
I think the answer might be a clear one.
Sounds like it's a question of ingredients and how that gets applied. But okay, well, I want to thank everyone. Jay, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to convey to everyone before we wrap up?
Beyond mentioning what I did with respect to, what was our thinking when this decision was made, and it was a question of balancing the views that we heard from the consultation process, and then balancing that against what the whole intent of the enterprise of the SFCR was, which was to be, innovation supporting and that sort of thing. And noting that as you guys work together, we would really encourage folks to see a unique value in their product to consider making that voluntary claim on the label. And I agree with the folks who spoke today that, you know, consumers are smart and information helps them. And I think the extent that people can work together to coordinate, you know, what they tell consumers about their particular products would go a long way, in my opinion.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And I've learned a lot through this panel, and I think that this is an ongoing discussion and conversation. But I also think it's a really important conversation in light of the review process. Even if there aren't clear ways of changing aquaculture standards through this process, I think that there were a few things that came up that should be considered going forward. So thank you to all the panelists again. We will be sharing this recording with all of the participants, and we look forward to hearing from you. We'll be sharing also a survey on the webinar, and we want to know how it went for everyone. So please take a few moments to let us know. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.